Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here because today we are unpacking what might just be the most fascinating, tightly guarded, and highly debated frontier in modern psychiatric science. We are breaking down a truly landmark piece of research from the OTW Journal covering the Aaronson 2024 trial. You see, for years, the psychiatric community has held a very firm line on who gets to participate in psychedelic research and who absolutely does not. But new data is forcing the field to ask some incredibly difficult questions.
Okay, let's dive into this. If you look at the modern renaissance of psychedelic science, starting back in the mid-2000s with Johns Hopkins and Imperial College, bipolar disorder has been universally excluded. Every single major trial for depression or anxiety kept bipolar patients out. Why? Well, because since the 1960s, there's been a deep structural fear of triggering devastating manic episodes. The case reports were out there, and when you weigh the asymmetric harm of a severe manic episode, which can take months to recover from and can quite literally destroy a person's life, against a total absence of safety data, that universal exclusion made perfect sense. It was the absolute right call at the time.
But, science doesn't stand still. And recently, we got a glimpse into the real world that challenged that absolute assumption. A 2023 survey published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology looked at 541 individuals with bipolar disorder who were self-administering psilocybin. The result? A 14.2% self-reported mania rate. Now that number is absolutely crucial. It proves the risk is real, you just can't ignore 14%, but it also bounds that risk. It means a manic switch isn't an 80% guarantee. It's not a universal absolute. The catastrophic prior assumption that psychedelics will always destabilize bipolar patients was, at minimum, overcalibrated.
Which brings us to Section 1, the trial that changed everything, Aaronson 2024. And frankly, the results of the very first peer-reviewed clinical trial of psilocybin in bipolar II disorder, published in JAMA Psychiatry, are just awe-inspiring.
In this breakthrough trial led by Scott Aaronson and his colleagues at the Sheppard Pratt Institute, 15 adults with treatment-resistant bipolar II depression were given a single 25 mg dose of synthetic psilocybin, paired with heavy psychotherapeutic support. The results were, frankly, staggering. At week 3, the participants' depression scores dropped by an average of 24 points. That equates to a Cohen's d effect size of 4.08. To put that into perspective, in psychiatric research, an effect size of 1.0 is considered large. A 4.08, that is like hitting a baseball into the next zip code. It is roughly 4 times the threshold for a massive psychiatric effect. 73% of the participants went into full remission.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the most shocking finding is exactly this: 0. Across all study visits over the entire 12-week trial, with mood monitored constantly, there were 0 hypomanic switches recorded. 0. Nobody developed a treatment-emergent manic episode. In a population that the field literally assumed was too risky to even test, the Mania scale didn't even blip.
Let's move to Section 2, the brain mechanism paradox, solving the neurobiological mystery. Because this is where it's like a giant puzzle. How can a drug that mimics serotonin and engages the exact same receptors as anti-manic drugs not cause mania?
You see, pharmacologically, this shouldn't work. The frontline drugs used to stop mania, atypical antipsychotics, work by blocking a specific serotonin receptor called 5-HT2A. Psilocybin actively stimulates that exact same receptor, so why no mania? The answer lies in a beautiful convergence of neurobiology. Bipolar disorder is fundamentally a BDNF deficit disease. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, is heavily reduced in both the manic and depressive phases. It turns out psilocin acts directly on the TrkB receptor to restore this exact BDNF pathway, with roughly 1,000 times the potency of ketamine. So mechanistically, psilocybin is acting directly on the exact neuroplasticity deficit that characterizes bipolar disorder.
But what about that serotonin paradox? Well, it really comes down to timescale and dosing. Antipsychotics silence the 5-HT2A receptor chronically, over weeks and months of daily pills. A psychedelic, however, provides an acute, massive pulse of stimulation for just a few hours. That acute pulse is followed by a rapid, therapeutic downregulation of the receptors and a massive surge in neuroplasticity in the days and weeks that follow. It's the stark difference between a daily chronic dampening and a single acute reset.
And this brilliantly illustrates the effect on a macroscopic level.
When we look at brain networks, bipolar II depression features a highly overactive, hyperconnected default mode network. We all know that feeling of being stuck in a negative thought loop, right? Well, this network is the engine behind that rumination. Psilocybin specifically acts to attenuate and rebalance this exact overactive network. It targets exactly what the disease is doing in the depressive phase.
Now, Section 3, the absolute lithium rule, the hard limits and dangers. We need to radically shift gears here because things are about to get incredibly serious.
It is absolutely crucial that you do not walk away from this explainer thinking psilocybin is a safe, easy, at-home cure for bipolar disorder. The medical contraindications are absolute. Just look at this number, 47%. In 2021, a pivotal paper analyzed reports of people combining lithium, the gold standard mood stabilizer for bipolar disorder, with classic psychedelics. They found a roughly 47% seizure rate. Almost half the people who combined lithium and psychedelics had a seizure. The combination acts as a highly synergetic proconvulsant. This is not a relative caution, it is an absolute hard contraindication.
So the crucial point is that the incredible success of the Aaronson trial only applied to a highly curated, very narrow, low-risk slice of the bipolar spectrum. To even get into the trial, participants had to be washed out of lithium completely. They could not have bipolar I disorder. They could not have a history of psychotic features, recent substance use, or any prior psychedelic-induced mood elevation. The trial succeeded because it surgically isolated the lowest mania risk subgroup of bipolar II patients.
Bringing us to Section 4, what we still don't know, open questions and the future. It's time to bring ourselves back down to earth and look at the massive caveats.
While the psychiatric community is excited, they are incredibly cautious, because there is still a mountain of things we simply do not know. First and foremost is the N equals 15 constraint. Statistically, this is just a pilot study. Actually, scratch that. It's a tiny, open-label pilot study, meaning everyone knew they were getting the drug and there was no placebo group. In bipolar depression trials, the placebo response can historically be as high as 50%. Furthermore, a 12-week trial cannot rule out long-term cycle acceleration. Bipolar D operates on a 12 to 24-month natural cycle. We just don't know if a psychedelic dose today accelerates a manic cycle a year or two down the line. Let's move to and see how this builds across the clinical pipeline. It's clear we are at the starting line, not the finish line. Definitive proof is still years away. Following this 2024 pilot, UT Houston is expected to finish a trial testing sequential doses by 2027. And we won't see a gold standard randomized controlled trial from the University of British Columbia until roughly 2028. And I want to read this quote directly from the authors of the Aaronson trial themselves. Care should be taken in expanding this paradigm to BDI disorder. It is premature to extrapolate these data to the BDI population, who are at higher risk of mania and psychosis. Bipolar I remains an absolute contraindication under the current standard of care. The staggering data we have simply does not change that fact. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. We have witnessed a paradigm-shifting pilot study. We've seen that the 2-decade exclusion of all bipolar patients was definitely overcalibrated. But bipolar II is currently the next great hypothesis in psychiatric science, not yet an established cure. So what does this all mean? Will this staggering early data hold up against the rigorous, large-scale, placebo-controlled trials of tomorrow? Or will the complexities of bipolar neurobiology prove just too volatile to tame? The next few years of research are going to be absolutely thrilling to watch. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.